맡은 덕정기술학회 회장 서강대학교 신관우입니다.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Professor Shin Gwan-woo of Seogang University, Chairman of Academic Society for Appropriate Technology, responsible of the International Conference on Science and Technology. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Professor Shin Kwan-woo of Sogang University, Appropriate Technology responsible of the International Conference on Science and Technology, ODA. Very nice to meet you. Thank you for your participation in the 11th Appropriate Technology International Conference despite a busy schedule. Before we start the event, I'll give you a brief announcement. This event is currently being broadcast online through the YouTube of the Academic Society for Appropriate Technology as well as the Zoom. So many participants, as you can see, are entered into the YouTube and the Zoom. Because we are broadcasting through YouTube, please take a look at the camera. All attending guests from the foreign countries and from Korea, please turn on your Zoom. And also for the smooth event progress, please turn off your mobile phone. Related to COVID, we are very limited event, so we don't have the audience today, but when you participate, please understand that there are some precautions, and I'm hoping you can wear the mask even when you're presenting the speech, so we can have more safe event. From now, we're gonna start the opening ceremony. First, I'll invite Director Hee Kwon-chung, Director of International Cooperation at the Ministry of Science and ICT. Please welcome him with big applause. Very nice to meet you all. I'm from the Ministry of Science and ICT, Jung Hee-kwon. The challenge of the post-pandemic, I'm very honored to be a part of this event. Mr. Frank Losman from the Green GGGI, Jerome Kim from the International Vaccine, and Yoon Jae-ung from the Korea Environment Institute, Kim Jin-yong Incheon Medical Center. The Corona-19 started from the last year. It's resurging the entire world, but fortunately, there are some approval and the clinical trials, successful clinical trials of the vaccine around the world. Because of the Corona-19, we are in the transition moment to the digitalizations. However, these challenges and changes are just limited to part of the countries. All those developing countries have to suffer more. So international cooperation is facing difficult situations, and we have to just continue this scientific development. The developing countries are recognizing our science development as the best, so our ODA is facing the directions of the new era. We're supporting other countries and with a lot of ODA projects to strengthening our capabilities and to solve the problems. And we have developed 62 projects so far, such as purifying water system and solar systems, and 4,300 talents were nurtured to overcome these risks. We were going to strengthening our ODA capabilities with the long-term strategies, and we will be responsible as a part of the world society. This conference will give some opportunities to discuss the development of the science and technology. With your passion, I would like to appreciate your passion and will expect the world will change with the science.
Thank you very much. Your opening remarks. In this pandemic situation, we have many people who have difficulties in the ODA field. Next year, I hope that Ministry of Science and Technology will provide great support next year. One of the organizer of this conference is NRF. The president of NRF is here. Please welcome her with a big round of applause. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am No Jung-hae, president of Korea National Research Foundation. In the search of research of COVID-19, we are having this international conference. So I would like to thank you for being here today despite these difficulties. And also our keynote speaker, Frank Lisberman, Director General of GGGI, and Chae-Rong Kim, President of IVI, and Yoon Jae-yong from Korea Environmental Institute, and Kim Jin-young from Incheon Medical Center, and also session speakers and panelists. I would like to thank you for your efforts, and also our participants who are participating here online. I would like to welcome all of you. These days, we are having unprecedented pandemic, and we have concerns about our security and health. And we are now faced with a global crisis. Fortunately, we have some news of success of some vaccines, but we are not sure whether efficiency of or efficacy of the vaccines, and we are not so sure about their durability too. And many countries are making efforts to produce vaccines and treatments, equipments. So science and technology is more important than ever before, and international cooperation is also important. And against this backdrop, from science and technology, some are eliminated or some are disregarded or isolated. So we have to be inclusive. We have to make inclusive society to deal with those difficulties. And also we need to take equality issues too. So in order to tackle with common issues, we need to strengthen our partnership, and also we need to promote science and technology ODA projects. The importance of science and technology ODA is bigger than any time else. It's been 10 years since Korea has been joined a member of ODA projects. In 2020, we have 3 trillion Korean won as a funding for ODA, and many ministries are funding around 100 million Korean won. And through the ODA projects, we helped Cambodia, Laos, Nepal, Tanzania, Ethiopia, Vietnam, Indonesia, these 7 countries. Global issue dealing centers has been established, and we are dealing with urgent issues in local areas. For example, in the Per Center, LOA, all the manufacturing process has been automized so that we can relieve the burden of women there, and working hours have been reduced by half, and we also improved their income. And in Vietnam, with the Ministry of Health in Vietnam and WHO are doing some work supply project, and we are providing some clean water to the patients in hospitals there. And also in Tanzania, and we have some people from Tanzania, we are dealing with solar panel, and we have established solar panel, and also we are making masks so that they can be protected from COVID-19 in local area. We have made such a progress, but some of the ODA projects had faced difficulties due to COVID-19. Some of the schedules have been canceled and delayed, and those who dispatched it to the local areas, they had to come back to Korea. So we need to extend the timeline of the project, and also we need to give flexibility in terms of the execution of the financing. And we have to deal with some issues in local areas. We need all the efforts and collaboration to this end. I hope that this conference will serve as a good opportunity to share our wisdom and discuss the future direction of science and technology ODA. Once again, congratulate you on the opening of this international conference. I wish you all the best and happiness. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Director Nu has celebrated and gave us the welcome speech. We're expecting that the fund will increase next year. And next, I'd like to have a welcome speech from President Chung Byung-ki of the Green Technology Center. I was just introduced Chung Byung-ki of the Green Technology Center. This year, there were many disappointments in the global village by the COVID 2020. In these very difficult situations, we can have this international conference. So I think it's a very meaningful event. Corona pandemic is a method to change the global conditions, and it will give them another opportunity to share the examples of the technology and the science. It is an effective method. The ODA should be recognized as a good method. Corona pandemic is prolonged, and the more active Korean type of the Green New Deal should be used to develop the sustainable carbon removal. Especially President Moon has emphasized the 2020 carbon recognition, and the most important thing to have succeed in this plan is the technology. So Green New Deal and ODA expansion should be one of the most important projects. Our ministry has been actively utilized all those best practices to support the sustainable technology development. One of the example, the global problem solutions has been provided to the 60 different developing countries with 4,000 talents. To expand this success, our ministry has uh, established the Advanced ODA project. The pandemic should, so, solution should more enlighten the ODA projects, and there should be a lot of ODA projects, and the responsibility should be more highlighted. So our excellent technology, green technologies, should contribute to the developing countries and to have the cooperation. There are many challenges that we have to solve. First, the cooperation with the developing countries, we have to be cautiously select, and also the interest between the countries. The cooperation between the developing countries should require the platform, cooperative platform, and how we're gonna adopt the technologies and the sustainability should be set with the strategies. In this context, this conference should give us an opportunity to look at the tracks in the history and should contribute to the sustainable cooperation. I think this is very meaningful. Through this conference today, the Science and Technology ODA, not only good examples, but also the failures or some reluctant or some lacking area should also be looked at. Through the appropriate technology, the Science and Technology ODA and the climate crisis, we have put a lot of efforts, including our institute. I'm hoping that we can share and learn from each other. Thank you very much for operating this meaningful event with the Ministry of Science and ICT and Applied Technology, and also the Seoul National University, and also the speakers for the keynote speech, Mr. Frank Rice-Berman, Secretary General, Jerome Kim, and Brad Hazeltine at the Brown University, and Yoon Jae-young of the Korea Environment Institute, and Kim Jin-young of the Incheon Medical Center, and all the participants watching this conference through YouTube. I'm hoping that this conference will become an opportunity and give insights to develop science and technology ODA strategies. Thank you.
With this Green Technology Center, we are having cooperation. I hope that we can strengthen our partnership further next year. When we were selecting the venue, we had difficulties, but Seoul National University has provided this venue. So lastly, we would like to welcome Oh Se-jang, President of Seoul National University, for his remarks. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am President of Seoul National University, Oh Se-jang. In the surge of COVID-19, we are having this conference. So I would like to thank you for being here today despite difficulties and some risk. We had some confirmed case in our national university. Um, so we should be careful. Um, and not our members of the national university, but some visitors were confirmed, and also some students are coming next week. So we should be extra cautious. I attended 3 to 4 times in this conference. Mr. Yoon Jae-yong, actually, he invited me last time. When I first came to here, I thought that when I was in overseas countries, especially in developing countries, they have interested in Korea's improvements in science and technology sector. So this conference is quite timely and meaningful, and I've been here for many times. Compared with advanced countries like U.S., in some of the aspects, Korea is better than other advanced countries. Especially under the crisis, I was able to find out something that we are good at compared with the advanced countries. Some advanced countries have some systems which proved not good. So against this backdrop, many people in Korea, I hope that they should have some pride in terms of the improvement of science and technology in Korea. Due to COVID-19, the gap between haves and have-nots will be widened and inequality issues will emerge. So in order to deal with such problems, we have to gather our wisdoms together. And this conference is quite meaningful, and appropriate technology is a good tool to deal with the gap between haves and have-nots. And we are having this conference online due to COVID-19. I hope that we can continue our efforts. As you are well aware, the climate change or pandemic will continue in the future. Such an issue should be solved by the international collaboration. Not one country's effort cannot solve this problem. And also, we need to collaborate with advanced countries and also developing countries together so that we can tackle the global common issues together. We need consortium and consensus. I would like to thank all the keynote speakers and participants. And also, I hope that this conference will serve as a good venue for good discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The president was participated many times when he was the member of Congress too. And I'd like to thank all those institutions who are cooperating and help us to hold this conference. We're going to start the keynote speeches, but there are some. But before that, we'd like to take the photo first. speakers and also the participants through the Zoom, please turn on so we can take the pictures together as a background.
Those who have participated here online, with them, we took the photo together. Soon we will start the keynote speech. We have 5 keynote speakers, and the moderator for the plenary session is our 2 professors. First, An Sung-hoon, professor of Seoul National University, and Dr. Kim Tae-gon from Korean Technology Center. Mr. Kim, please. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am Kim Tae-gon from Korean Technology Center. First keynote speaker, I will briefly introduce him with English.
I'd like to introduce to you our first plenary speaker, Dr. Frank Rice-Behrman. He has been engaged with the theme of sustainable environment and poverty reduction in international organizations and philanthropic foundations. And he specialized in water resource management and planning, and he's working as Director General of GGGI since 2016 and is newly reappointed for this position. So please welcome him to the floor. Yeah. With applause. Yeah.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I thought I could follow your good example and speak without mask, but my instructions are speak with mask, please. I hope you can hear me. It is very nice to be in this conference on appropriate technology. It feels a bit like coming home. I have to say, in 1975, I read the book of Professor Schumacher, Small is Beautiful, on appropriate technology, and in 1977 I was one of the founders of the Multidisciplinary Center on Appropriate Technology in my alma mater, Delft University of Technology. So it was wonderful to see the appropriate technology out here for Tanzania that is such an advanced appropriate technology, and I believe that is indeed quite possible. Appropriate technology can be indeed quite advanced, and I'd love to talk to you today a bit about the role of green science and technology, particularly, of course, in this time of COVID-19 recovery. And my key point will be that the COVID-19 recovery can be green, and that science and technology can play a critical role in that. So yes, I'll first talk for a bit about the deeper sustainability crisis that the COVID-19 pandemic is such a signal of. I'll talk a bit about that green recovery, particularly the role of science and technology, and then in the end a bit about green deals, important in Korea and around the world, and how science and technology can contribute to that. About 1 year ago, most of my speeches were to explain that 2020 would be the year of climate change. Because if you remember, only a year ago, we had the school strike for climate. We had the first year. I've worked on climate for 40 years, but last year was the first year that we had people out in the street demonstrating to demand government action. And this is the year that countries have to resubmit their nationally determined contributions to the Paris Agreement. So this really was meant to be the year of truth for the Paris Agreement. And climate has not taken the year off. It is still just as important. And indeed, of course, here in Korea, people in the street are probably even more convinced of the importance of air pollution than climate change, while for most of the rest of the world that is sort of a silent killer. I remember visiting Vietnam and nobody was worried about air pollution. Nobody was wearing masks like we do even before COVID here in Korea. But air pollution is even higher in Hanoi than it is here in Seoul. And of course, then there are the even further away from our bed crises, like all the plastic in the oceans that comes back on our plate every time you eat fish through microplastics. So yes, then suddenly we had the COVID-19 crisis, and I have to admit, early in this year, I was worried that all this focus on the health crisis would take away focus from the deeper sustainability crisis. But I think the silver lining that I see is that many people actually take the COVID pandemic as a signal that our lifestyle was not really sustainable and that we have to change. But can we? Can we not only focus on vaccines, which is of course this day, this week, the #1 issue, but can we focus on greening the recovery? How will that work? And can we go back to our old lives? Or are we really always going to live in a new normal? I think that is the critical issue. GDGI is an intergovernmental organization. We have about 450 people, about 100 here in Seoul, but 350 in more than 30 countries. Most of those did not come back to Korea or did not go home. They're still in those countries, working from home, working with governments, and finding out, surprisingly, that we can. I think 2020 has been a year of many challenges, but we are finding that people are adjusting, people are resilient, governments are learning to let their people work from home, projects are still being approved. We see lots of results. And indeed, we came out with a report in July that compared the stimulus packages in 2008-2009, after the global financial crisis, with today. Already then, there was a small green component in the US, in China, that did help to bring the price of renewable energy down. But by and large, the support for brown technology, for energy-intensive industries was much bigger. So after a small decrease in greenhouse gas emissions during 2008-2009, very quickly after, emissions came back with a vengeance. Can we do better now? If we can do better now, the change, the improvement in science and technology will be the critical factor. renewable energy having become cheaper than fossil fuel energy, and things like that. And for us, even before COVID-19, we realized that green jobs, green employment were critical for many governments in making green investments. So we looked at the employment impact of the nationally determined contributions in countries like Mexico, Indonesia, and Rwanda. NDCs were set, but the only real impact that had been studied was their reduction on greenhouse gas emissions. Governments hadn't calculated how many green jobs were associated with those NDCs. And our results that came out during the middle of the pandemic showed that in Mexico, simply implementing what the government had promised for the Paris Agreement would generate 1.5 million green jobs. In Indonesia, even more. And indeed, those jobs associated with green technology were 2 to 5 times more than their equivalent conventional fossil fuel technology. So this, to me, in quick summary, is the heart of the argument why the recovery has to be green. Because it will generate more employment, which is of course the #1 priority for almost all governments around the globe. So what role can green science and technology play? When I'm out here in the hall and I see that nice microgrid, technology has advanced enormously. But out there, when we speak with developing country governments, many of them are still not convinced that renewable energy is the solution, that renewable energy is cheaper, that renewable energy will not damage their fragile grids. Or, of course, a little like in Korea, there is a national monopoly, a utility, the incumbents are well entrenched and are simply resisting this new technology coming in, even though we can demonstrate that it's cheaper. But yes, we now see many interesting projects. In India, of course, this year GGI was very happy. We generally work on policies with governments who sometimes lift the barriers on people putting solar panels on their roofs, for instance, or to enable policies that encourage private investors to invest and try to come up with innovative projects, including investment projects, using KOICA or Green Climate Fund or private investor money. And this year, during the pandemic, we were very happy that we demonstrated to the Maharashtra State Road Development Corporation that builds highways, very big highways, that those projects are great enablers of renewable energy investments. In the end, we showed that not one long line of solar panels along the 700 kilometers, but every major interchange was an opportunity to do a renewable energy investment, solar panels, about 250 megawatts. That project closed this year, and the follow-up project is to then put electric charging infrastructure on the highway to enable that road to be ready for electric buses and electric vehicles. Of course, energy storage is a key issue, but the falling prices of battery were a critical, I think, technological advantage for Korea, is already at such a stage that for a small island in the Pacific or in the Caribbean, where their alternative in many cases is diesel-powered, diesel-generated electricity, even the cost of renewable energy plus batteries is already cheaper than the alternative. So investments in solar energy plus batteries are commercially attractive, which you as engineers here in the university may know, many governments out there do not trust that basic fact. So coming up with projects that demonstrate that these are commercially attractive investments are to me an enormously important part of that acceleration of green technology. And yes, then it gets into interesting projects around the world. People are working on BRTs, bus rapid transit systems, often inspired by those BRTs from Seoul, from Korea. BRTs were one technological innovation, I think, that is pioneered by Korea. But in many cases, the BRTs that are being designed are still being designed for diesel buses, to put in place old technology that will lock in diesel buses for 20, 30 years. So we are trying to work with municipalities in Jordan, or in Ethiopia, or in Cambodia, in Nepal, in many developing countries, to think about electric buses, even though they might still be more expensive if you get them from Volvo, cheaper if you get them from BYD, but worth considering because you otherwise lock into the wrong technology. So those sustainable transport considerations, I believe, are a huge issue. Of course, many countries, including Korea, are investing in hydrogen. Very important for universities, very important for research. We don't really see the application immediately for many of the developing countries that we work with, but indeed, Science and Technology ODA could explore when this technology will reach the streets of Addis Ababa, for instance. So that's, I think, an important subject as well. Buildings is probably the largest area that is underinvested in our view. Not always fancy buildings, but many different technologies that make up either retrofitting homes or offices. We don't really understand why it doesn't happen at a much larger scale. It really should. It's a really large part of the climate agenda, and it has a very large opportunity for green employment. So GHI has worked on this, for instance, in Mongolia with a private bank to set up a green finance corporation that will invest sort of wholesale to retail, brings in green climate fund money, and then allows the government and private banks to put those out in small loans for people to buy more energy efficient appliances or to switch from coal to electric heating in the GERs. Those are the kind of practical projects that we're involved in. This was approved recently by the Green Climate Funds Board, but it took several years to put in place. In places like Rwanda, I had a very interesting meeting with the Ministry of Infrastructure. I wanted to talk about green buildings, but he wanted to talk about his airport, because that was the biggest infrastructure investment in the country. So I asked him, will it be a green airport? He laughed. He was like, it's an airport, what do you want? I said, well, it could be a green airport. And I'm proud to say that Bugusera Airport will probably be, when it's certified by Singaporean authorities, the first green airport in Africa, incorporating rainwater harvesting and other simple technologies, reducing the requirements on cooling and so on, and in the end becoming cheaper. So those are the conversations we need to have with authorities. At the same time as in Rwanda, we talk about what excites us more, frankly, green technology for affordable housing, using the World Bank loan that comes in for affordable housing to really stimulate local building materials and using green building technology, and indeed applying the green building code that we helped develop there as well. Another potentially, I think, underinvested area of science and technology is what we in climate call nature-based solutions. More investment in things like preserving forests, either reforesting in some areas or avoiding deforestation, which in many cases has to do with improving the livelihoods of smallholder farmers so that rather than cutting down the trees, they can become stewards for the forest. And yes, surprisingly, their success often depends on access to science and technology, which allows them to have a decent living without exploiting or over-exploiting their natural resources. So we work in Colombia on preserving the Amazon, but at the same time, therefore, we work on a modern bioeconomy strategy, which the government has adopted and believes that it will bring in some 10% of GDP by 2030, will bring a large number of jobs, and will critically depend on modern science and technology to combine that with their more traditional agriculture sectors. Climate smart agriculture then, I think, is also not talked enough about. You know, when we talk about climate, it's usually about energy and transport and buildings, but the agriculture, and particularly the agriculture and food sector, is up to 30% of emissions, and the largest part of employment in virtually every developing country. 60% of the next generation of Africans will have to find their employment in agriculture. We have to find a way to make that agriculture both more productive so that Senegal can become rice self-sufficient. Senegal is Africa's largest rice producer, but also Africa's largest rice importer. COICA is working on improving rice value chains, and we are introducing climate-smart agriculture and solar irrigation into those systems to use modern science and technology to increase their climate resilience and create more green jobs. In small islands like Kiribati, yes, they are super vulnerable to climate change, but they also have one of the largest incidences of chronic diseases like diabetes. About 80% of the people are overweight and obese because their access to healthy food is very poor. Unfortunately, they like instant noodles as much as Koreans do, but they don't have too many opportunities to eat vegetables on the side. So we propose there a climate-smart agriculture project that actually focuses on school gardens combined with modern technology like solar irrigation, but to increase the number of people who grow vegetables and sell vegetables in a climate-smart way, but also to improve their health and nutrition. In the Philippines, we work on climate-smart agriculture by improving value chains. This is a COICA-funded project where we're saying, yes, there are a lot of farmers in poor parts of the Philippines that grow calamansi, fruit, but almost all of that gets exported unprocessed. If they can process that safely into higher value products, they can benefit from a larger share of the value add. And they can potentially be connected to Korean buyers or use Korean technology in those type of projects. To just give you one last very different aspect, we also work a lot on waste. Waste is a huge problem almost everywhere in developing countries. Recycling doesn't happen as much yet as it does here in Korea, but there are big opportunities to both use the organic fraction of waste to produce, for instance, things like bio-CNG, or a project we have in Peru to generate electricity and then the remainder into fertilizer. So thinking about ways to reuse waste in a circular economy way, I think is a very high priority. And even the plastic fraction we find in places like Cambodia, Vietnam. Vietnam, we closed a project this year to take the plastic fraction of waste into RDF, refuse-derived fuel, and to put that into cement plants to replace the imported coal from Indonesia. So all those are smart uses of technology that improve people's lives as well as green their economy. So we were thrilled, as I hope you are, that President Moon announced the Green Deal as part of the COVID recovery. And initially my slide said, but unfortunately the President didn't make any commitments to a clear target. So we were also thrilled that on the 28th of October he added a net zero pledge. So the net zero pledge together with the Green Deal, I think really gives Korea a position of leadership. And when the President invites world leaders to come to his P4G summit at the end of May next year, Korea can really demonstrate its leadership in this area and hopefully bring other countries on board to make similar pledges. So Korea's Green Deal, of course, was combined with the Digital Deal, a lot of smart and green combined for Korea. GGI also made a modular Green Deal for emerging and developing economies to advise our member countries that a Green Deal is not just for the EU or for Korea or for advanced economies, but it's also important for developing countries. The only difference, I think, many elements are the same between Korea's deal and what we propose to our economies, but there's a much larger share of natural capital investments, the kind of project I showed you around forests and agriculture, in what we would propose to member governments in developing countries than there is in Korea's deal. So other than that, I think investments together with policy changes are a hugely important part, and I would certainly hope that the ODA projects that Korea engages in years to come uses science and technology to help countries come up with their own Green New Deal to generate green jobs, but at the same time make their economy more sustainable. So yes, my final conclusion is that green science and technology are critical for a more sustainable basis for the economy, and I don't really mind if you call it bioeconomy or circular economy or the green economy. All of these have key contributions to make, whether from industry or from agriculture or from managing waste, to making our economy more sustainable. So thank you for your attention, and I wish you a wonderful conference.
Thank you very much, Dr. Frank Rice-Bellman. Actually, we planned one question Q&A. For better time management, I would like to ask you just one question. It's about your recommendations to Korea. Can you tell us a bit more how the Korea have to approach green growth structuring toward partner countries in this COVID-19 era?
In Korea, here at home, I'm hoping that more companies will join RE100, EV100, and so on. I'm very pleased to see that SK, Shinhan, LG, batteries have made those first pledges. But I think the big difference between Korea and many other countries in Europe is that the private sector is at the moment still much less engaged in the green side of the Green Deal, pushing back almost, bringing more of those companies along, and also looking at their investments in Vietnam, in Mongolia, in many places where Korean companies are a large part of the manufacturing and a large part of the economy. I think it's a great way to use that foreign direct investment of Korea in a more positive way. Because I think ODA is critical, but it's too small to make an impact by itself. So we're going to have to think about how to use ODA to come up with innovative ways, but in a way that brings the private sector along, so that the real investment, the real flow of investment becomes green as well. So yes, I love the kind of projects we see out here, the appropriate technology, the microgrid for Tanzania, but the critical question is how do we scale that up? How do we have solutions that are as big as the problem, which will require the private sector. But then I think Korea has many technological advantages. You know, I don't understand why Korea doesn't make more electric cars or why there isn't a larger engagement in sustainable infrastructure. I don't see enough green buildings here in Korea, but I think Korea has many technologies that could contribute to greening the building and infrastructure sector internationally as well. And of course, all the smart technology that Korea has can be integrated, like the example here in the hallway, into renewable energy, drinking water, irrigation solutions. I think there are many advantages, smartly deployed, that can make a lot of appropriate technology sense. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So private sector must do more in Korea. Yeah. Thank you. With this, we finish the first plenary speech. Thank you very much.
Okay, it's my honor to introduce and invite a plenary speaker, Dr. Jerome Kim. As many people probably already know that International Vaccine Institute is a world-renowned institution for vaccine research, and its importance is increasing under this pandemic situation. Introducing Dr. Jerome Kim, he is the director of the International Vaccine Institute and an international expert on the evaluation and development of vaccine. His depth and breadth of scientific experience span basic research through advanced clinical development. And Dr. Kim had authored over 250 publications, and he received numerous awards for his activities. Among them, he received John Mahar Award for research excellence from Uniform Service University, and also he received the other award, Army R&D Award for Technical Excellence, 2013. He is a graduate of University of Hawaii, and then he received his MD degree from Yale University School of Medicine. So without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Jerome Kim with big applause.
안녕하십니까. And thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today at the International Conference on Science and Technology, ODA. It's been a long year. I think many of us will recognize that this has not been the usual circumstance. But as this dawn on Jeju Island shows, the day after efficacy is already here. So we've made progress on the first of the three hurdles that we confront when we're developing a new vaccine. We've been able to prove that at least over a 2-month period of time, at least 4 vaccines have shown safety and efficacy, that is, protection against infection or disease. But the next 2 issues are equally daunting. Can we make 16 billion doses? This is assuming that since most of the vaccines are 2-dose regimens, and there are 8 billion people in this world, how are we going to get 16 billion doses made? And then how are we going to use it? And how are we going to allocate it? Are we going to be able to distribute it with equity and allow access to all countries around the world? How are we going to handle this logistically? And how are we going to be able to administer, make a jab in the arm of 8 billion people around the world? Again, this is recognizing that the vaccine is only the first step. Vaccines don't save lives. Vaccination saves lives. So this is from the New York Times. Actually, different organizations account for different numbers of vaccine candidates in development. So one of the estimates is that there are over 300 different vaccine candidates in various stages of development. Some of them are simply ideas. Some of them have undergone some development in the laboratory, so discovery. Some of them have been tested in animals, and over 50, now probably over 55, have been in human clinical trials. And a number of those have advanced into the final stage of testing, what we call phase 3, where vaccines are evaluated in tens of thousands of people for safety and efficacy, that is, prevention of infection or disease. You can see that the 4 candidates that have been announced so far, now none of these are yet in scientific papers, so this is all from press releases. And science by press release is maybe one of the other legacies of the COVID-19 crisis. Those of us who have argued that science should be more transparent, I think we're arguing really that scientific information should become more transparent, not that press releases should be more transparent. And actually it's very difficult sometimes to make comments because the press release has a lot of information that we have to infer. And anyway, I think that you'll all recognize Pfizer-BioNTech has a vaccine efficacy of 95%, tested in tens of thousands of people. It even has efficacy in the elderly, which is again something that has been very important. Gamaleya, which is a Russian vaccine based on adenovirus, has 92%, Moderna 94.5%, and AstraZeneca probably had the most confusing press release of all. First, they report that maybe the vaccine is 90% efficacious, but overall it's 70% because people who got the right dose had only 62% efficacy. And we'll go into that in a little greater detail in a second. So what do we have to go on? You know, when we were thinking about this, actually back in the beginning of November, we wrote a commentary for one of the major scientific magazines that has yet to be finally reviewed, although we've gotten some pretty good indications on it. And the title of that editorial or commentary was "The Day After Efficacy." And it was submitted a week before Pfizer made its announcement. The process of review has now rendered the title obsolete because we now have efficacy, not of 1 or 2 or 3, but of 4 different vaccines. And we expect that more vaccines will come in the future. But as scientists, we look at the data that were generated, and we had some things that would have suggested that this vaccine development might have been less complicated. The first was, and I'm actually going to start on the left side of the slide. The first was that we saw protection in non-human primate models. In other words, you could vaccinate a monkey and challenge it with COVID-19, and the monkeys in general were protected against disease, and in some cases were protected against infection. 14 articles have been published. All of them have shown protection in the monkey model. We can also protect ferrets and transgenic mice, and actually adapted strains of vaccine can protect normal mice, not even transgenic. So it's shown success in a lot of animal models. So that was one piece of information that might have been a hopeful sign. The second piece, and again, I'm combining data, so that's always dangerous. And so you see the little red box at the bottom. The assays were not standardized, and each company did its own assays. But if you use their reported data, you can look at what's called neutralizing antibody. These are proteins that fight against infection made by cells in the body called B cells. And neutralizing antibody is thought to be very important in the control of viral infections. Neutralizing antibodies, in their function, will bind to and inactivate viruses, which is the reason vaccinologists like me consider neutralizing antibodies sometimes to be the target, the thing that we look at most promisingly for vaccine development. And you can divide the vaccines in phase 3 into 3 tiers. Tier 1 has neutralizing antibody levels of 100 or less. And that includes 2 Chinese vaccines, CanSino and Sinovac, and Gamaleya, which is the Russian vaccine. Levels of neutralizing antibody between 100 and 500 include Johnson & Johnson, Sinopharm, another Chinese company, AstraZeneca, and Pfizer. And then titers greater than 1,000, or levels greater than 1,000, include Moderna and Novavax. Now, I think you know the results from this. Moderna is 94.5, Gamaleya is 92%, Pfizer is 95%, and AstraZeneca is, let's just call it 70%. That's their combined total. So it's distributed throughout the different levels of neutralizing antibodies. So does it mean that neutralizing antibody is irrelevant, or does it mean it's necessary and sufficient at any level for protection at 2 months? And again, we don't have the answer to that question because we don't have more than 2 months worth of data. We very importantly not only don't have efficacy data beyond 2 months, but we don't have safety data beyond 2 months. And so the US FDA, in its guidance to vaccine manufacturers, actually was very clear. In order to achieve emergency use authorization, so the first approvals are not going to be blanket approvals to market this like the measles vaccine or the pentavalent vaccine that LG makes. This is going to be emergency use authorization. And final approval will be based on longer-term follow-up for efficacy and safety. And that is a typical requirement for regulatory agencies. It's the reason that as a physician, I can assure a patient that a vaccine that we're recommending is safe and effective. And it's an important piece of information for doctors, healthcare providers, for governments to assure the population that the vaccines that they're recommending are both safe and effective. This is another way to look at the chart, and these are the original front runners. You can see Moderna there, and what this chart shows is actually kind of an interesting thing. The first circle is when the vaccine first went into humans. The second circle is when the first data out of humans were reported. The third circle is when the phase 3 trial started, so that is the efficacy trial. And then the hatched bars indicate when vaccine production started. So Moderna's vaccine production actually has been slightly delayed, so the company is now expecting significant production only by March. But Pfizer-BioNTech has definitely started production and has actually started to ship vaccine already to the UK and to distribution sites within the United States. Oxford and AstraZeneca definitely have been producing vaccine, and I think everyone knows that Sinopharm has given over 1 million doses of its vaccine under emergency use in the absence of efficacy, in the absence of safety, reported efficacy or reported safety, but 1 million doses have already been used. And a report yesterday in a major newspaper said that China is preparing to ship millions of doses of vaccine out around the world once approval of the vaccine is given. So you can see the companies that already have emergency use authorization. They're based in China and in Russia. Again, no data on efficacy or safety for any of these vaccines. And you can see in red, with the red star, the companies that actually have reported efficacy data. So, how did we do this? I mean, normally it takes 5 to 10 years to develop a vaccine. It costs $1 billion, according to the vaccine companies. And the failure rate from lab to licensure is 93%. How did we get all these vaccines safe and efficacious in 12 months? And it's actually kind of an interesting phenomenon. I think everyone knows that companies are averse to risk, especially if it's going to cost them $1 million and has a 90% rate of failure. So what did we do? We basically came at them with funding. In order to de-risk opportunities for a company, you offer funding. Because funding allows them to then say, all right, you're willing to take the risk that this will work, we're willing to accelerate it. And that's exactly what the US government, through Operation Warp Speed, did. They provided $18 billion in order to accelerate vaccine development. Now, the US hasn't done much right in terms of controlling the COVID-19 pandemic. But it knew what to do in order to motivate the companies to make vaccine as quickly as possible. And not to cut corners, but to remove some of the things that companies would normally do in order to de-risk the process. At the same time, an organization that Korea belongs to, known as CEPI, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation, put $1.4 billion with the companies in red, so there was overlap between Operation Warp Speed and CEPI. Operation Warp Speed was really vaccines for the United States, very narrowly. This is to protect the American population. And you can see what the US government did in order to give the AstraZeneca, get AstraZeneca to make its product quickly, it gave them $1.2 billion. To Johnson & Johnson, $1 billion. At the same time, they pre-ordered 300 million doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine, 100 million doses of Johnson & Johnson's vaccine. And many of the companies began to manufacture the vaccine with this funding before they had the efficacy signal. And in order to have vaccine available as soon as emergency use was granted. That was important because in the United States, the social and political techniques that were used to try to control the pandemic have not been successful. So really only a vaccine technological solution is available to the country. So thank goodness that they were able to successfully demonstrate efficacy. CEPI, on the other hand, is actually not focused on a single country. CEPI is dedicated to global access and reasonable cost. So in joining CEPI, Korea did a great thing. They participated in a multilateral effort to rapidly develop COVID-19 vaccines. So vaccine manufacturing, making enough vaccine for the world. CEPI believes that we can make 4 billion doses, that the world has the capacity to make 2 to 4 billion doses of vaccine for COVID-19 per year, which will mean that we probably won't have enough doses to vaccinate everyone who needs to be vaccinated worldwide until 2023 or 2024. Operation Warp Speed actually manufactured hundreds of millions of doses at risk, and some of those doses are already being shipped now that Pfizer-BioNTech has demonstrated efficacy. And finally, and this is the one potential silver lining that came out of the COVID crisis, big companies like AstraZeneca, like Sanofi, like Butantan or Johnson & Johnson have subcontracted the ability to manufacture vaccines around the world, so that rather than restrict vaccine quantities to their own production, they've been willing to license vaccine manufacturing. And South Korea, with its very strong vaccine manufacturing capabilities, has really been a center. CEPI just signed a contract with Green Cross for 500 million doses of an unknown vaccine. SK has a contract to make both the AstraZeneca vaccine, Chadox, and the Novavax vaccine. And a small company, and I can't remember its name, has agreed to make the vaccine for the Sputnik 5, the Russian company, Gamaleya. So again, globalization of manufacturing. And actually you can see it here. I mean, people talk about this as a race and as a national race, you know, the US vaccine versus the French vaccine versus the Chinese vaccine. In fact, when you look, companies, especially in the West, are distributed all over the world. So Pfizer is partnered with BioNTech, which is a German company. Pfizer, a US company, partnered with BioNTech. Sanofi has a major R&D hub in Swiftwater, Pennsylvania, but its headquarters actually is in France. GSK is based in the UK. Its manufacturing is in Belgium. It has a major R&D center in Rockville, in Maryland, in the United States. So these are global companies. Hard to say that a vaccine from Johnson & Johnson, which is a US company, being made by Janssen, which is their European subsidiary that makes vaccines, is an American vaccine. But it's even more impressive when you look at where in the world these vaccines are going to be made. They're being made in Argentina, in Mexico, Brazil, in India, Lonza in Europe, and then 4 companies, GL Rafa is making the Sputnik 5 vaccine, all over the world. So really, it's impressive globalization of effort. People also often ask, what are the costs? And it's almost impossible to know because individual governments will negotiate costs. But this is a compendium of reports from newspapers. We go from a low of $1.37 per dose for a whole inactivated vaccine from Bharat to a high of roughly $70 a dose from the Chinese company known as Sinopharm. Now, this is Sinopharm's stated price currently for the emergency use vaccine. It's likely that the Sinopharm vaccine can probably be made for something more like this. But initially, this was what they charged to Chinese residents who wanted to be vaccinated against COVID-19. The next issue is distribution and use. And luckily, we have yet another one of these unprecedented developments that occurred during COVID-19 as a result of the pandemic. Countries around the world were concerned that only the countries that have vaccine manufacturing capability would actually get vaccine. And as a result, CEPI, Gavi, which is the Vaccine Alliance, which distributes vaccine to poor countries around the world, and the World Health Organization organized the COVAX, and Korea actually has joined COVAX. Almost all the G20 countries, except for Russia and the United States, are part of COVAX. 190 countries have agreed to participate. 2 billion doses of vaccine will be made available, which will reflect roughly 20% of the country's total need for vaccine by the end of 2021. So for Korea, that's not such a big deal because Korea has the funding to be able to purchase vaccine. But for poorer countries, for the 92 countries that are going to be a part of the advanced manufacturing commitment, these vaccines may be the first vaccines that they get. So unlike many other premium vaccines, which take a long time, sometimes decades, to go from a high-income country to the low-income countries where burden is very significant, with COVID-19 vaccines, we are able, through COVAX, to provide advanced vaccine technology nearly concurrently in high-income countries and in low- and middle-income countries, which is a real achievement. And hopefully this will be a second legacy of COVID-19, which is more equitable access to the new vaccine technology. So COVAX is a great idea. They've made their first $2 billion commitment, and that's great. There's still 80% of vaccine supply that the countries need that still needs to be obtained. And one of the things that's worrisome is the high-income countries have reserved 8.8 billion, or pre-ordered 8.8 billion doses of vaccine. And so how COVAX will be able to get its fair allocation is still a bit of a question. Modeling suggests that if the high-income countries take the first 2 billion doses without any consideration of equity, global COVID deaths will double, and the ability to control the transmission of COVID-19 will be made less efficient, so that we could see prolongation of the pandemic. This actually is primarily for what's on the left side of the slide here. What we don't want is for something to happen similar to what happened with rotavirus. With the rotavirus vaccine, the vaccine was developed and approved by the US FDA in 2006. By 2009, there were very few cases of rotavirus diarrhea in American children. The vaccine is enormously effective. WHO approved and recommended this vaccine in 2009, and 11 years later, in 2020, 60% of the world's children still have not received 3 doses of rotavirus vaccine. And we don't want this to happen with COVID-19. who would take a vaccine, and depending on who asks the question and how they ask the question, the number seems to vary. So about 50% of people would definitely take a vaccine. Another 20% of people would probably take a vaccine. There are maybe 10 to 15% of people who say absolutely not. And then there's a group of people who are convincible. And I think the one thing that I always bear in mind is, the average American parent allows their children to be vaccinated, so 80% of them anyway, with 26 individual injections for 14 diseases, many of which they have never seen in their lives because of the success of vaccination. So we have good uptake of vaccines. We need to be able to persuade people now, not just parents, but people, that these vaccines are safe and efficacious, and that is a critical part of what we do. So against that is the global opposition, vaccine nationalism, the infodemic, which actually is increasingly a problem because the trickle out of information about vaccine efficacy has been followed by a deluge of information, of misinformation around the safety of vaccines. The anti-science groups, the anti-mask groups, the anti-vaccine groups have seemed to combine together in many countries. And this actually presents a major problem. And countries around the world are going to need to engage in the type of a community engagement that we see around climate change. I mean, we need to be able to convince people to take the vaccine, which means that we need to overcome the things that are driving people to not accept pronouncements about the importance of masks and the importance of vaccination. So science, transparency, internationalism, and public and global health really have to drive the discussion. But we have to be able to, and I think this is where science communication is so important, we have to be the advocates. We have to be persuasive. We have to be able to explain to people in terms they understand what the vaccines are, what they do, and how safe they are. This gets to another part, which is, in order to make people receptive, we have to be better, maybe particularly in the United States, at science education. Because we have to be able to explain to people about these new technologies. And unless they're literate in science, we are not going to be able to reach them effectively. So, 16 billion doses. Prioritization, so again, because vaccine isn't available globally for everyone in, for instance, Korea, the government will have to prioritize. Now, in some countries, that will be the elderly and healthcare workers, which is easy. But then they're going to roll out the vaccine in mass campaigns. Well, how are you going to tell who's been vaccinated and who hasn't? If you've got a truckload of vaccine and 6 people who are vaccinating everybody who steps up to the van. So again, prioritization creates a special problem. Some people have noted that the Pfizer and BioNTech vaccines have to be stored at much lower temperatures. Actually, 16 billion doses of vaccine would take 8,747s. Now, in fact, we need, that's 8 billion doses. 16 billion would take twice as much. So we need a huge global logistics capacity. There are going to be multiple formats. So in any particular country, there could be 3, 4, or 5 vaccines being used. And are there differences, and can we mix them? Is going to be an important question. Do we vaccinate people who've already been infected? So I think in Korea there have been cases of people who've gotten second infections. Do we need to vaccinate people who've been infected? And we just don't have the answer to that. So how are we going to do this? Do we need to enlist celebrities? My daughters don't know who this is. This is Elvis Presley. But famous people, like, will BTS step up and each take the vaccine in order to convince people that it's safe and effective? And the final thing is, I do believe that we can do this. I mean, vaccination programs are something where we have global uptake. 80% of the children around the world get the standard EPI vaccination. So we know we can vaccinate children in poor countries. Now we have to worry about vaccinating not only those children, but their teenage siblings, their parents, and their grandparents. So, final thoughts. We perhaps have 4 vaccines showing short-term safety and efficacy, and we'll have more in the next month or 2. What more needs to be done? Manufacturing, we talked about. Vaccination, the logistics, implementation, equity and access and allocation. The other big questions are scientific questions. We did rush through development, so we may not have optimized the dose and the schedule. We need to have vaccines, I think, that are durable. that protect for more than 2 months, and we don't know that we have that yet. What are the correlates of protection? A real scientific question, but something that will speed up vaccine development. We need to have real-world evidence. Everyone thinks that having the vaccine will protect society. In fact, the vaccine trials, 30,000 people tell you answer one question: does the vaccine protect an individual? The question of whether the vaccine protects society is actually a separate issue. It's called effectiveness. And that's how we generate herd immunity. But in order to do that, we have to vaccinate significant numbers of people and understand whether vaccination of individuals actually protects society. A really critical question for government policy. Finally, there needs to be surveillance for new mutations of the virus itself, like the cluster 5 infections that occurred in mink in Denmark, and also for new and emerging coronaviruses. I mean, are we going to be ready for COVID-21 or COVID-24 or COVID-28? And what threat do these really pose to us if they don't respond to the current vaccine? We have to do longer-term safety follow-up. Sometimes, even despite vaccinating 30,000 people, there are events that are very rare, 1 in 50,000, 1 in 100,000, and we need to know what those are. So again, that we can assure people that these vaccines in fact are safe and that we are worried about safety, that we have enough concern to be monitoring for this. We have to figure out how to deal with the opposition to vaccination. And finally, there are going to be questions around licensure versus emergency use that are starting to emerge already as new trials are being brought online. So finally, I think the thing to remember is the vaccine is just a weapon in a war against COVID, but we still need an army of vaccinators to fight and win, and we need a strategy. A strategy that will include vaccination, but at least for an extended period of time will include the other important aspects of prevention and control, including masks, distancing, and hygiene. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for insightful presentation. We have one question from Flower, if you can. Any questions from audience? No. Okay, Dr. Lee, please.
Hi, I'm Hobri from Tanzania. Do you see a need for a person to get different kinds of vaccinations with vaccines? Because the vaccines are different, and the sources are different, and types are different, and there may be a need or perceived need for someone to take multiple vaccines.
Yes, that's actually a great question. Actually, it relates to one of the unanswered questions. So typically, when you get a vaccine and you get a booster, you get the same vaccine as a booster. In this case, you have multiple different kinds of vaccines. And one of the issues is, can we actually safely use an RNA vaccine and follow it with a vaccine made from adenovirus? So that is a really important question. Some of the companies that are a little bit behind the current crop of candidates are using protein vaccines. And protein vaccines are vaccines that are very specific. They can be combined with adjuvants, which are chemicals that actually further augment immune responses and often give you prolonged protection. So are those the ideal boost? And again, we don't know. That's a very important question, and one that we have not yet begun to address. Because if you're Pfizer, you don't want to have your vaccine mixed with somebody else's vaccine. Because if a side effect develops, are they going to say it was because of your vaccine or is it because of the vaccine that they just got as a boost? So we haven't seen that yet, and that's something I think that countries and governments will have to deal with. And what some of us are a little bit worried about is as these vaccines become available on emergency use, a person who participated in Pfizer's vaccine trial, but whose arm didn't get sore and who didn't feel awful after the second dose will say, I think I got placebo, so I may just go and get the vaccine that's available through emergency use. That will confuse the data in places. And there are some countries where multiple vaccines are being tested in the same city. And again, raising the possibility that there could be some confusing data coming out, especially now once the vaccines are put on emergency use. So that is a really good question and one that we just don't have the answer to yet. as a vaccine person, often heterologous boosting is mixing vaccines, sometimes actually gives you a better response. But we don't know the answer for COVID-19. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much again. Okay, let me introduce third plenary speaker, Professor Brad Hazeltine. I think he is online now from US. Professor Hazeltine is a professor at Brown University. Now he is a professor emeritus, but still in teaching in Brown. He received his undergrad degree from Princeton University and master's and and PhD from University of Michigan in 1962. In 1915, he received the Susan Carver Rosenberg, the highest award of the Brown faculty award, and then he also received numerous other awards. He is very interesting career. He taught in many different developing countries, such as Zambia, Malawi, Botswana, Zimbabwe, etc., etc. So he traveled a lot in different countries and also teaching. His research deals with appropriate technology and entrepreneurship, and he authored 2 books, A Field Guide to Appropriate Technology, and another book, Appropriate Technology Tools, Choices, and Implications. So as I said, he is online, and then he's going to give a brief welcome message to you. Okay, please welcome Professor Hazeltine. Professor Hazeltine, can you hear us? If not, we may just proceed, and then we can have question and answer session later. Then we can contact him again. Okay?
Okay. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm greatly honored to be part of this event. We're at a time sorry.
Okay, Professor Hazeltine, we'll go ahead and then I'll show you a presentation first, and then at the question and answer session, maybe we can call you again. Okay? 야, 동영상 틀어주시겠어요? 준비된 동영상.
Please play the video.
Hi, I'm Barrett Hazeltine. I'm professor at Brown University, and I've been interested in appropriate technology for about 50 years. I've taught at the University of Zambia, Malawi, Botswana, and also in Zimbabwe. So what I want to talk about is how appropriate technology ideas have changed in my lifetime, and at least address some questions for the future, and then have a slide on the implications of the present pandemic. So I want to start by saying appropriate technology is alive, and I think it's easier to understand what's going on if we look at some examples. I realize the danger in looking at examples is people you leave out, so I apologize wholeheartedly to friends whose picture didn't get up here. Okay, one example is Paul Pollock, and what Paul really contributed was this attitude that it's got to be a business. If you can't sell it, don't do it. And then I'm going to talk about Amy Smith, Martin Fisher, and Daniel Kahneman. So let's do them in order. There's Paul Pollack, and he's obviously the gentleman standing on the right, and the machine is a well digger. But I think the important sentence is he created machines to help poor people make money. This is Amy Smith, and I realize you probably can't make out the picture in detail, but I think the idea is clear. This is actually in Haiti. Amy suggests collecting biomass, leaves, twigs, whatever, or burn, carbonizing it, and eventually comes out with briquettes. And obviously, the usefulness of briquettes is that it saves the forests. People burn the briquettes rather than trees. Next example is Martin Fisher. Martin Fisher, in fact, has a company called Kickstart, and he is selling these pumps, began in Kenya, but now in several places in East and Southern Africa, and has really affected the lives of millions of farmers who now can grow in the dry season and sell in the markets when nobody else is selling. I think you can understand what's going on. It's foot-powered. If you look carefully, you don't see any bolts or anything adjustable. Martin designed it so that it'll work forever. And the last side is Daniel Kahneman. Daniel Kahneman is a professor at University of California in Berkeley. He got into cook stoves because he was looking at the quality of the air in small village homes, and the quality of the air was terrible. The quality of the air was terrible, of course, because the fuel didn't combust correctly. And so one design is here where the fuel is in this area down here. This is probably a door to open it up, and you put the fuel there, and the air comes in from the bottom, and you put the pot on the top, and the combustion is complete because the air is coming up this way. This is another version of the same thing. This one has a ceramic liner. The purpose of the ceramic liner, of course, is to save the heat energy, keep it into the stove, then go to the pot on the top. The disadvantage is that if you're using the stove also to warm your hut, then it doesn't work, and you're better off with something like this. Again, literally millions of people's lives have been changed because the air in the hut is clean. Okay, now I think we can go to some of the more general ideas. Seems to me appropriate technology, the term, refers to really two different entities. One is the software and the other is the hardware. And the software is the approach, and I think we've seen definitions like this many times. Who can argue with these words? And I sometimes think when I'm trying to get some software application to work that I wish the designer had read this and try to make something that the user could use, that it was efficient and environmentally sound. The hardware then refers to devices created according to this approach. And we've just seen 4 examples of the hardware, and we didn't really talk much about what the intention was, although it was implied by the slides. This paragraph at the bottom is really not very important. It's just that if you read some of the other papers, you sometimes read about hard and soft technology. Okay, so what's happened in the last 50 years? Seems to me in the last 50 years is that the approach, the software, has mostly shed its countercultural association and is being recognized as a viable alternative. And what do I mean here? What I mean here is that when appropriate technology was in its early stages, after the book Small Beautiful came out, it collected a lot of people that we might call hackers, people who love to build things and love to talk about how they were going to change the world with their new device. And I don't know how to say this nicely, many of them we would call, these days we would call hippies. And although they built a lot of good stuff, they turned off a lot of mainline engineers and others interested in development. And I think those people have sort of passed on, and now we have more conventional engineers really looking at appropriate technology as a useful approach. And the other theme in the last 50 years is that the appropriate technology hardware is really being done much better. Let's develop these ideas a little bit. I'm struck in the last 10 or so years by how many more people know about appropriate technology than used to. 15, 20, 30 years ago, I'd tell people I was working in appropriate technology, and they had no idea what I was talking about. Now you mention appropriate technology, and people say, oh yes, we know. I remember in Zimbabwe about 15 years ago, I was trying to explain to somebody about appropriate technology, and he cut me off and says, yes, we do that over in the other building over there. But I think it's true also in the more industrialized countries that appropriate technology is understood. And I think more important is that we're seeing a lot more appreciation for simple user-controlled designs. And in a sense, you can say Apple Computer, now called the Apple Corporation, has really succeeded on that premise that people want something simple that they think they're in charge of. And another indication of its recognition, of course, is renewable energy, which solar cells, windmills, small-scale hydro, which really had their roots in appropriate technology, but now, of course, everybody is using them. The other thing that's happened is that, as you see here, the standards have risen a lot. There's much less acceptance of the makeshift apparatus made by these clever hackers, but needed a continual tinkering. And Paul Farmer, who well-known physician who did much work with the poor in Haiti, was vehemently critical of amateurish devices unloaded in the third world as appropriate technology. That they really was coming out, and appropriate technology was second-class technology unloaded on the third world. And that's changing. Related to the quality of technology is the contribution of Paul Pollack, serious attention to costs. That if the device can't be made so the local people can buy it, then it's not worth doing. And I think the third point that's important is that new technological developments have greatly expanded the possibilities. And of course, digital equipment is the most important of those changes. So let's just look quickly at digital technology. And these are just examples that came to mind, and they have no particular order, one more important than the other. One example of contemporary appropriate technology is drones flying over fields and analyzing soil conditions and either transmitting the information down to the ground or putting it in a flash drive on the drone and bringing it down. And obviously the point is that the farmers can then see what's really going on in their field, where you can't really see when you're walking around as much. Another example of where appropriate technology has made a great difference is cell phones sharing information. Unilever in India was one of the early pioneers here that by setting up computer kiosks in farming communities, farmers could see what the prices were at certain markets, compare different markets, decide whether they're going to hold the product off the market or sell. Read an interesting article about indigenous tribes in the Amazon basin who simply were not able to talk to other members of the group. It was a 2 or 3 day walk to the village. Once iPads were given, then all of a sudden people could talk to each other. We all know what I mean by controllers for PV panels. They started out as basically diodes to protect the panel. Now they do signal conditioning so that you can send power back into the grid. Lots of medical applications, especially these days. 3D printers where you can make small devices on site. Rapid diagnostic devices, again, are important and are widely used. Baby monitors is one example. Indicators for these days COVID-19, but also various diseases. And vertical farms are important, or are supposed to be important, and they require not only water and fertilizer, but they also require illumination, and this is digitally controlled. And we are hearing a lot about microgrids now. It used to be in Puerto Rico, and now it's in California, where the power lines go down. So what's the implications? Well, I think most people would agree that a cell phone is an acceptable component in appropriate technology. No question about that. And I think that a circuit board interfacing an LED lamp with different power sources is an appropriate technology. It is so someone with an LED lamp can charge it either from a solar panel or from a bicycle-driven generator or a windmill or something like that. But then we get into other questions. Is telemedicine, which uses cell phones, is that an appropriate technology? And what about a fairly sophisticated computer-based controller for a small-scale windmill? you need the controller to get a usable power waveform out, and also to be as efficient as possible. So, of course, what's on my mind is in the bottom sentence, the danger exists that these impenetrable technologies will redirect the appropriate technology approach. And I think everybody knows what I mean by impenetrable. I don't know how to fix a computer-based controller, and I think most of the users won't. I think most users can use cell phones, but it's not quite clear about the other devices that are part of telemedicine. So I am worried about this urge for technological excellence. It's really going to work against the small-scale, user-friendly aspects of appropriate technology. This question has been around for a long time. I agree that you should do whatever works, and I agree also that it doesn't matter whether we call a technology appropriate or not appropriate. We worry about whether it does some good. But I do worry about whether an attention on sophisticated digital devices is going to influence people to get away from the small-scale, user-friendly aspects that has made appropriate technology useful. Just a minute or two on COVID-19. I think people have seen most of these articles. When respirators were in short supply in the U.S., many people came up with various ideas for making simple but effective devices. Masks and sanitizers were also made by local, made by families and small groups. Because people had to stay home, they were encouraged to be self-reliant, and a large number of people began growing food. And we read that sales at home improvement stores are way up. Maybe this just reflects the unfortunate situation that people are out of jobs. And certainly the measures implied to deal with COVID-19 are low-tech, user-controllable technologies. And in the same way, a major issue when we lose mobility and lose the ability to be with our grandparents, then we can, I hope, use low technology devices to combat the inevitable loneliness. Okay, well, thank you for listening. This is basically what I had to say, that appropriate technology has moved beyond its beginnings, and is a mature technology. Hardware people making now is better. Digital technology has opened new opportunities, and we still have to worry about losing the strength of appropriate technology. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Hedgeton. Yeah, let's connect him again. He was in online, and then now he's connected. So, yeah, please, Dr. Hedgeton, yeah, give us brief messages again, if you want to say something. Please. Could you say something?
Okay, thank you very much again. I think it's important to have conferences like this because people working at appropriate technology don't always have the technology transfer mechanisms that big corporations offer for other kinds of technology.
Okay, yeah, it was very insightful, and I like the digital, appropriate digital technology. Yeah, that's more like a recent technology from the generic appropriate technology by definition. Okay, thank you again, Professor Heseltine. Yeah.
예, 그럼 저희 그 세 번째 기조 강연자를
Next, we'd like to have the third key speakers, the President Yoon Jae-yong of the Korea Environment Institute. He's a professor in the chemical department of the Seoul National University. He'd like to share us about the environment policy. He's the chair of the appropriate technology department and also the President Advisory Council on Science and Technology, and as the member of the President Committee on Sustainable Development. Very nice to meet you. I'm the President Yoon Jae-yong of the Korea Environment Institute. Korea Environment Institute is the research institute developing the policy of the environment. I feel like I'm very relaxed when I always attend this conference. Makes me feel like I'm home. Thank you very much for inviting me. This COVID-19, this is a severely difficult situation right now. However, I'd like to give appreciation to Mr. Shin Ga-nu, An Sung-un, and all other staff for organizing this wonderful conference. The topic that I'd like to talk today is the Green New Deal, Korean type Green New Deal, and what should be the direction. How does it relate it to the Science and Technology ODA? Professor Frank Reisberman has explained a little bit about the Korean type Korean type Green New Deal. I think that the appropriate technology was explained by Professor Hazard, but this concept has been expanding. The way we can do the science and technology, the policy and the philosophy of the government, I think we are heading for the mainstream. Science Technology, Ministry of Science and Technology is attended today. Social problem solution is using the science and technology. Why do we have to do the science and technology? Helping people and helping developing countries and pursuing the community, that's actually one of the reasons we are doing the science and technology, which has not been paid attention so far. Today we're going to talk about the Green New Deal. This is the cover of the Time magazine. Looks nice. But CO2 emission is increasing, Earth's temperature is rising, and because we are using too much fossil energy, we have to use the renewable energy. This picture is uh, was in the Economist. The temperature, Earth's temperature, shows that the blue part is the low temperature, and this is by the years. After the Industrial Revolution, like 1 degree is increased, but in the future, we're expecting 3 to 4 degrees increase. And then we will have a very difficult situation after that. Through this, the economy magazines, there's this temperature increase as the mainstream. This is a little bit complex. Called emission gaps, how the Earth will control the temperature. In order to do so, it will allow some certain level of the emission, but now the amount of emission is huge at the moment. So by 2030, maybe we will have to reduce the emission to the half. In 2050, no emission should be allowed. That's called net carbon zero. So substantially, how can you have the zero emission and in the Earth? The climate change is due to the caused by the energy, use of energy. But energy, anyway, we have to consume energy to live. So our society should not be excluded. So how are we going to respond? Only two ways. One, we have to reduce the green gas emission. But even if we do so today, it will take 20 to 30 years to have the effect. And we need to protect our people and the assets. In the raining season this year, it was like a disaster. It could have the human error, but the environment infrastructure is not responding to the climate change. So these existing infrastructure should be reinforced, which will cost us. This is also a little bit complex. It says that no matter how much you're emphasizing the climate change, but then globally the emission level, carbon emission level is increasing. And one focus is the coal. Half of them, 50% of them, is because of the coal. So there's a social consensus that we need to reduce the use of coal. How about Korea? It shows increasing. 1990 is important because 1992 there was a environment meeting in Brazil. For the past 30 years, we have been putting efforts. However, the emission is increasing globally, although we have put a lot of efforts over the 30 years. We don't know in the future. We are emitting around 700 million ton. These statistics show that OECD country, it's in the OECD groups, we cannot have the good evaluation. CO2 emission per person, all those are high level. GDP emission compared to GDP. In our case, we are just newly recognized, so our evaluation is not so good. So the industry structure, city construction, all requires energy. Reducing energy cannot be done just suddenly. So without a systematical plan, it's going to be difficult. So this one is the recent one. I think all of us can agree. But then there's a fast movement these days. I think we need to know. Recently, China takes 28% of the emission level. So it's going to be like 1/3 of the global level. But they have announced that, China announced that they're going to do the carbon emission, zero carbon emission, as well as Japan. In terms of the economy, we are a little behind than the Japan, but we see in the industrialization level, we are heading to China. We also announced that we're going to do the carbon neutral by 2050. On the right-hand side of this graph shows all those countries that they have already made an announcement. And we haven't gone yet. This is a very meaningful picture because we are using energy which include gas, oil, nuclear power, and everything. And we have to reduce the amount of use of the fossil fuel. How are we going to reduce the amount of the fossil fuel? That's going to be a very big topic. And by using that energy, we're generating electricity so we can use them in our daily life. So this new carbon neutral, in order to conduct the carbon neutral, all the policies need to be changed. Include transportation, city operation, and all others. TOE, we are using 300 million TOE. Energy transition is very difficult, as you can see from the picture. The red part, the level of reliance of the fossil energy accounts for 80% in 1990. Over the past 30 years, in 2017, we see very similar percentage, like 81%. OECD we can see that they have reduced the 3% by the efforts of the 30 years. But non-OECD companies, which we also talk about, those developing countries, they show the increase from 28% to 35%. The president of the Energy Economy Institute made this graph. So this is very difficult. So we put a lot of efforts and then reduced the emission by overcoming a lot of conflicts with the people. And how about the developing countries? Because their economy is a little bit grown, and then they have to reduce the carbon emission. So climate change is very difficult. This is the energy we are using, which takes more proportion. You can see the 36%. Mainly transportation. You came here by driving your car. The amount for the transportation is also large. And raw materials, for example, like steel, cement, by increasing the temperature, they're not using the fossil, but those are the raw materials. So if we don't allow them to use it, then their business is going to be closed down. Let's say Pohang Steel Company, if they don't use the carbon, then our economy cannot stand. We're looking at 30 years later. But by 2030, we have to reduce 50%. Not 100% by 2050, but our plan should be established that we're going to reduce the 50% by 2030. A new process, of the chemistry and engineering, it takes so many years to run the factory. So in the research institute, there are so many R&D projects and patents so that we can reduce the climate issues by 2050. So we have to be well prepared. Steel, chemical, and cement. By combining these industries, it will take 30%. Why so much? Because it's the economy structure of Korea, unlike Europe. So if we succeed in energy transition, then no other countries, every countries can do. We are in the group facing the most difficult situations. Green New Deal. Due to the COVID-19, the economy is really having a difficult moment. Many people, to 20 million people lost the job. So there is a need that we have to activate the economy by investing. So Green New Deal, we also have to deal with the environment crisis, climate disasters, and so this is gonna be the difficult route globally, and we need some changes under this corona. That's the background of this policy. So transitional Green New Deal is the term. So what are you gonna do under this policy? To briefly explain, in the beginning, we just talked about the digital New Deal announced by the government. Because this is science and technology, ODA. The cost and the budget of the development of the science and technology, such as big data, AI, unmanned car. I'm also an engineer, but it's really amazing to see the speed of development. So in this digital transition, if we fall behind, we cannot survive in the international society. So that's why the digital New Deal was announced in the beginning. But we didn't focus much on the Green New Deal. So we have to set the targets why we have to change. If we are not succeeded in the digital New Deal, then many people will lose their jobs. And for the aged people, it's going to be really hard to follow the digital New Deal. So we need some other new value responding to the climate change and the social vision. So we changed to the Green New Deal. But it wasn't sufficient because in this kind of changes, the richer people can have a way to deal with it, but in order to protect the poor people, we need to secure the safety net. So government established many policies with the 10 projects. And 5 Green New Deals were included. It's to me, it's familiar slide because I've seen a lot. By 2050, government said the policy that they're going to invest 70 trillion won. And with the 600,000 job creation, so these are the projects that the government wants to conduct. 3 key elements is that it's going to be hard to do it by the city structure as now. We're living in the city, so the buildings need to be changed. And in the city, transportation system should be changed in an innovative way, and also other areas such as ecology. But in a broad concept, it's like a green transition of the city. Because we are depending so much on the fossil fuel, we have to do the transition of the energy by using renewable energy such as wind, solar, and there's no space, then we have to go to the ocean. By having the renewable energy system, we cannot just use the renewable energy, so we have to set the systems where we can use. And the third part, our industry uses a lot, huge energy, so we have to make the green transition of the industry. We titled as the green industry. So in each project, how much is the budget? This table shows. So if you're interested in, then you can take a look what are the projects and what kind of, in connection with the science and technology, because this is policies are already announced by the government. The R&D is newly established. So 5 projects I would like to cover briefly. First one is the Green Smart School. Digitalization of the schools by using, for schools to use renewable energy. Government set a huge amount of budget on this project, and because industries use a lot of energy, so we also have the policy and the purpose of the Smart Green Industrial Complex. And we have a lot of windows, so insulation is also a problem. So public office should use the insulation by using the renewable energy. So green remodeling is the other project. And green energy, I already covered. Also, transportation system should be changed. By 2040, we have to stop and then have to turn into the electric EV or the hydrogen car. Although this is not fully sufficient, but transportation system itself has to be changed. It's not just our problem. Why do we want to do these difficult projects? There are many questions. But this is a global trend, including the Biden government. Biden said he's going to do the environment projects and carbon fee is also planned in New York. Those commodities in the New York, which uses carbon energy, then U.S. government wants to charge. So the U.S. government is also making a fast movement, and also Europe. Europe has prepared long time ago. So as the method to develop, the method of developing the economy should be changed. And there is a social consensus in Europe. So following that policies, the society has been changed. So all the commodities introduced in the Europe market, then they're going to charge. President Mr. Frank has mentioned about this. Our large companies in Korea are making a fast movement because they want to export to the Volkswagen, and they're asking to provide the certifications by if your products are used by the renewable energy, because we are highly depending on overseas export. So we have to be sensitive about the social changes, international society. In the economic crisis with the COVID-19, economy booster has been emphasized, but in US and EU, they are relatively longer plan. Green New Deal is criticized because it is focusing on the short-term object. Anyway, the society needs to be changed, so the Congress is making a lot of different legislation. By accepting those requirements, the policies are modified. This is the vision created by our institute to turn into transfer into the sustainable society. Carbon neutral should not impact the economy, national economy. So while we are doing that, we have to secure the competitiveness, green competitiveness, to achieve the inclusive transfer. How are we going to do that? Including me, all of you will have to share and think about this. The auditor today are also concerns about the world, not just Korea. So if we look at the developing countries, this problem is going to be more difficult for the developing countries. So we have to gather wisdom and cooperate with some meaningful movement. And I think this appropriate science and technology will contribute on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your insightful presentation. If you have any questions, please raise your hand and I will take a question.
One of the representative example is tree. Recently, we introduced the carbon storage technology was suggested, but up to now, it is not stabilized yet. So we don't expect that much. We say that 700 million ton. So we can, maybe we are now thinking about 2,000 million. Carbon zero is the topic of all around the world. So leading countries, they have to do it more because developing countries need to emit to grow their economy. If we stop them because of the earth, they will not accept because leading countries are making a big emission already. So it's going to bring some conflicts if we stop them because they are in the stage of growing economy.
The last speaker, I'd like to introduce the last speaker, Jin-Young Kim, medical doctor from Incheon Medical Center. He will talk about science technology that is fighting against COVID-19. Dr. Kim, as you are well aware, he has implemented drive-through screening clinic. He developed the idea of drive-through screening clinic and appropriate technology in healthcare center. He is well known for this area, and he is a graduate of Hanyang University's Graduate School of Public Health, and he worked as a doctor at Gachon University Gil Hospital. And from 2012, he was the head of Incheon Medical Center Disease Control Support Group. So please welcome him with a big round of applause. Thank you for your invitation. Thank you. I'm not a lecturer at the school. I'm a doctor working at Incheon Medical Center. I was invited by the organizing committee. I was invited this summer to be here as a speaker in the international conference. Today, the number of newly confirmed cases is more than 600. Now we are preparing for the third wave of pandemic, so a little bit depressed. But we need to gather our wisdoms, and I hope that my idea can help you to gather wisdoms to tackle with these issues. First woman who was coming from Wuhan, the first confirmed case, I was treated the case. And also from Daegu, Gyeongbuk area when we had the big cluster infections. I was a member of TF team for coronavirus. At that time, I invented drive-through screening clinic. It was highlighted by media and many people gave attention, but it didn't happen overnight. I went through a lot of some efforts to make that happen. From 2012, I had been working at Incheon Medical Center. This is a pandemic phase. In Korea, when it comes to disaster, when disaster happens, attention level begins. But in CDC and WHO, there are interpandemic and interval sector, but we don't have this area. We have a manual, but we don't have any area for inter-pandemic or preparedness. There are many disasters like natural disasters. So in order to be preventive, to respond to these disasters, we need to have such an interval or inter-pandemic phase. In 2012, we called this virus as novel coronavirus. This was the MERS. And New England Journal of Medicine actually highlighted the case of training for new coronavirus. We had mock training in 2013 because we have negative pressure word. So we did simulation under the assumption that we would have new infections. So one of a person in Saudi Arabia died of an unknown disease. So 3 colleagues, they left the country and they came to Korea and they were quarantined. And they came to our institute, our center. At the time, we didn't have any manual based on some influenza, but it was found out they didn't have MERS virus. Based on that, we made some improvements. And more upgraded one, also we assume that we might have new virus like MERS, but we had Ebola case in 2014. WHO actually declared the emergency for Ebola. So after my leave, I had to be prepared. So the first case of Ebola came to Korea, and he had fever, and he went through quarantine of Incheon airport. And we should be very careful when we contact the confirmed case. Anyway, we were successful in responding to the suspected case. And we were prepared for Ebola case in advance, and we did drills and mock trainings. So in 2015, we were prepared for Ebola case. But as you know, in 2016, MERS came to Korea. As you remember, there were some infections of medical staff at medical centers in metropolitan area, and all the medical staff at that time, many of them didn't know how to prepare for or respond to the MERS cases. So they were not prepared. That's why there were many infectious cases for medical staff. After the MERS, we made more efforts to respond to new infections, including Ebola and MERS. So we did some drills and simulations before Corona hit the country. So when we look back, the early of this year, 44 patients with pneumonia of unknown etiology have been reported to WHO on January 3rd, 2020. The cases were related with one fish market in Wuhan region. I'm not sure why WHO failed in terms of the investigation. Anyway, our medical center was prepared for this case. We did some task force and we had meetings to be prepared for the cases of this unknown pneumonia. This is a fish market in Wuhan region where there are possibilities of zoonosis. But this was not the only source for the infection. There is a highly likely that highly suggestive that outbreak is associated with exposure in one seafood market. This was the report from WHO. You can refer to their website. And genetic sequence was released by China, and diagnostic kits was developed based on that. When I received the first case, this is the video that I took with my smartphone. When I treat the new case, I always leave the report. So the person who is wearing the colored gown, his confirmed case, level D plus P. We wear the personal equipment, which is quite high level. And Ms. Zhang, Director Zhang, reported one confirmed case, first confirmed case in Korea. The U.S. is going through other pathways than Korea. According to CNN, in Washington state, the person coming from Wuhan City was the first confirmed case of new virus, but they chose different options. The number of new cases today in Korea is around 600. In terms of the epidemiology, this is the explorational curve. Explanation curve happened at the time in the United States. Anyway, there is unpredictability in terms of the infectious disease. We learned a lot of lessons from the United States. And there was no human-to-human transmission. That was the report from WHO at the beginning, but we witnessed human-to-human transmission, and we shouldn't be so sure about unknown case. That's the lesson we learned. One businessman in Wuhan, he came back to Germany, and the attendees, they also contacted the patient. Although the person was at that time asymptomatic, these people who contacted the first person were confirmed positive. We accepted this case, so we thought about how to avoid asymptomatic transmission. That's why we adopted facial mask wearing. The mask wearing was a big difference at the time in Eastern countries and Western countries. This is a sampling specimens. I did the sampling by myself because in the past, when I treated Ebola case, this pathogen was quite important. At that time, we didn't have any manual, but I wanted to make the manual. That's why I collected the samples by myself. And I reported this case to the central lab at CDC, Korean CDC. This is viral copies of this patient. In the beginning, we released this report, the viral copies. We know this very well, but in the beginning of the pandemic, we didn't know about these number of copies and different types and different patterns from Ebola and other diseases. In March, Nature Medicine journal, we reported that the infectiousness started from 2.3 days before symptom onset and peaked at 0.7 days before symptom onset. And through the virus culture, after 10 days of onset, infection level decreased. In the beginning, 70 days, for 70 days, patients was isolated, but nowadays, just 14 days quarantine or isolation period is given to the patients. So in the onset of the virus, beginning of the first week, that's the peak of the coronavirus, and immunology is coming back after around 10 days. So we have to take the medicine, which is controlling immune system. So we are very aggressive in dealing with the patients. Now I'd like to talk about COVID-19 screening center. 28 cases were coming from overseas. So we didn't have any local case in the beginning, but from Daegu we had case, locally transmitted case. The person was coming from Shincheonji, religious sect in Korea. This is the graph of February and March. From February 20th, thousands of cases had to be screened. And I was a member of TFT, so I made efforts to figure out how to do the screening test quickly. For example, when we have bioterrorism in Gangnam-gu area, we can collect information from the streets. We figure out how many people were exposed to the bioterrorism, and we give the medicines to those people who are exposed. This was my research, and based on that, I made this drive-through screening test method. Usually, virus is coming to mucosal surface, and with the type of aerosol, it is transmitted to others. These aerosols produced by coughing, sneezing, speaking. In order to eliminate the aerosols, we need air change. So air change per hour in order to remove the airborne contaminants 99%, 12 times, 23 minutes, and 35 minutes is required. So when the next patients require safety in terms of the screening test, after one patient leaves, 30 minutes is required. So in order to decrease these such a long period, we had to come up with some new measures. Based on my research on bioterrorism, I figured out the method that can be conducted in outdoor area. So I was inspired by drive-through like Starbucks. That's why I invented such a method. Incheon Medical Center, where I work at, we have 300 beds. 70% of Incheon patients, confirmed cases, are isolated, quarantined in our hospital beds. From March, May, August, we had cluster infections. When they were quarantined in our hospitals, when we had Kuro call center cases, cluster infections, at the time, 1 month period was the quarantine period. And after that, the quarantine period has been reduced as 14 days. But with severe cases, we had to extend the period for quarantine. And when we had cluster infections, we had more elderly people and we had more deaths at the time. And we have more than 600 newly confirmed cases, so we might have more peak and longer periods and more burden for staff members in medical area. So we should get away from the existing patterns. We should be very efficient when it comes to using medical resources. This is medical. This is negative pressure ward. Contaminated area and uncontaminated area should be separated. This is pass box and video call system, smart pad, Wi-Fi. These were implemented this year so that we can make a report without worrying about infections through the paperwork. We leave log online system and we embedded NF chip so we can record who was coming to the contaminated area. And we have 100 patients, and I'm the only person who is infectious disease sector. So we need to control the cases from the center. So we input critical signs of critical symptoms of the patients. So I review the critical symptoms and we review the critical cases through the cloud spreadsheet so that we can lower the fatality rates. Portable diagnosis devices is used actively, and CCTV is prohibited in principle, but we put monitors so that we can monitor the situation real-time basis. This is a wheelchair, negative pressure wheelchair, and negative pressure cart. We did drills to use these equipments, but these days we are using these equipment so frequently. Infection and high flow oxygen therapy, we are actively using these methods because it's very hard to disinfect all the surface. Video conference in the medical area. We rarely meet each other face to face. We usually do the online conference through the video call system. This is critically ill patients. For one patient, many medical people are required to deal with the situation. We know your difficulties in science and technology sector, but we have also difficulties in medical sector. So we need to come up with new methods, but We are now applying the classical methods along with the new methods. In spring of this year, we used such a tent, but after that, we made this container box so that we can have non-face-to-face treatment area. This is temporary area. Actually, it should be embedded inside the building. So we remodeled the building, and the first floor is the location for the confirmed cases. And this is Tokyo area in front of the Disneyland. People are lining for testing. And drive-through system was recognized by many people, but it was only the beginning stepping point. I didn't know I was gonna be invited here today, but I'm a doctor in the medical sector. I need more high technologies. I'm not the expert in high technologies. So with many experts from many areas, I would like to work with them. COVID-19 is a virus, so you shouldn't expect that medical sector or science sector alone can find solutions. We should work together as a consortium or based on consensus. Korea is well ahead of other countries in terms of dealing with COVID-19, but I'm not sure next year situation. We have same starting line. So this is an opportunity for us. So if we are dominant in this sector, our status of national status might be enhanced further. So COVID-19, actually, in 2019, COVID virus was first detected. SARS was in 2002 and 2003, and 2004 it disappeared, and MERS appeared in 2012, but still local infections continue in Middle Eastern countries, and we have third one, new virus. So we might have the second COVID and other infectious diseases might be more fatality. So it might not be resolved with the measures like new social distancing. So in new normal era, we should lead the world. We should take the initiative. So 2-week social distancing and vaccine is the most catch-up solution. This is not true. We need to be prepared for the future. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much for keeping time. So if you have any question from the floor, we will take one question from the floor. No particular question? Mr. Yoon? Thank you very much for your efforts. Thank you. Social distancing and quarantine measures continued. So people are exhausted, a little bit tired of these measures. So when I am talking with some people, they want to be more relaxed, relieved in terms of the economy. There are more people who want to have more relaxed, relieved social distancing measures. In that case, what would you expect? I have 2 children. They go to actually only one time in a week they go to school, so they are very sad, feel sad, and they are having difficulties because they are lacking their education hours. But in terms of the medical aspects, the curve I showed you, if we don't wear the mask, we will follow the same path of the United States. Then we cannot deal with such a situation. We are taking different options from the US, and they are if there is a confirmed case, they just stay at home. If they have very serious case, they go to hospitals. That's and also they are lacking medical beds in the hospitals. But in Korea, some mild cases, they still have hospital beds, but in the future, we might lack the beds of hospitals. They had to be stayed at home. So from the perspective of medicine, if we don't relax about the social distancing or wearing mask, it's gonna be very difficult to tackle the issues. Actually, I don't wanna wear the mask. For example, in the restaurants and karaoke, in restaurants, if we use the air conditioning and ventilation system, which is very sophisticated and expensive, we don't need to wear the facial mask. Why we have such a development in ICT and technology? We know that the cause of the disease, that's why we developed ICT and technologies. So after all the conditions are set up, we it's okay we don't wear mask, but otherwise it's not gonna be working. So if you need any assistance from science field, please contact us so that we can provide you appropriate technology. Thank you. Thank you very much. Your speeches, presentations. The reason why, actually, the invitation of doctors were very meaningful. Thank you. With this, we would like to close the plenary session. In the afternoon session, we will have special sessions for each sector. This will be proceeded online, and chair of each session will moderate the session. All the participants from online, please visit the special session again after you have lunch. Our Appropriate Technology Society from next year, with new operation steering committee, we will have better programs and better projects so that we can enhance the quality of life of the people. With this, we would like to close the session. Thank you very much.
To date, iTech has built 3 solar power plants, providing light to hundreds of people. Not stop here, iTech will continue to build solar power plants in Tanzania, and will do its best to strengthen local capacity through renewable solar energy. That's all of our introduction. In the future, we will continue to build power plants and generate electricity with several partners to improve the quality of life for Tanzanians. Thank you for your attention.
모두를 위한 차별 없는 따뜻한 치료. 그 치료의 힘을 알기에 우리는 머물러 있을 수 없습니다. 치료를 받지 못해 목숨을 잃지 않도록 옳다고 생각하는 일을 행하는 신념으로 우리는 세계를 향해 나아가야 합니다. 건강하고 행복한 사회를 만들기 위해 국제보건의료를 이끌어가는 우리는 서울대학교 의과대학 이종욱 글로벌 의학센터입니다. 전 세계의 열악한 현장을 발로 뛰며 현지에 꼭 필요한 보건의료 프로그램을 추진하셨던 고 이종욱 박사. 그의 숭고한 마음을 이어가기 위해 서울대학교 의과대학 이종욱 글로벌 의학센터는 설립되었습니다. 이종욱 글로벌 의학센터는 의료 상황이 취약한 나라의 역량을 향상시키고 국제보건의료를 이끌 미래 세대 양성을 위해 국내외 글로벌 의학 분야의 교육과 연구, 국제공헌 활동을 펼치고 있습니다. 이종욱 글로벌 의학센터는 교육이 다양한 건강 문제 해결의 가장 기본적인 핵심 요소라는 믿음을 기반으로 의학기술, 의료정책, 연구 역량 강화를 위한 폭넓은 교육 프로그램을 시행하고 있습니다. 서울의대 국제의학교육을 비롯하여 국제보건의료의 이해를 돕기 위한 인턴십 프로그램, 이종욱 박사의 숭고한 마음을 담아 보건사업의 개발과 역량 향상을 지원하는 이종욱 펠로우십, 세계적인 학자들을 초청하여 강연을 하는 등 의료 서비스를 향상시키고 가슴 따뜻한 의료인으로 성장할 수 있는 의학 교육을 제공합니다. 이를 통해 인류의 건강 향상에 기여할 수 있는 글로벌 인재를 육성하고자 합니다. 이종욱 글로벌 의학센터의 연구는 의료체계의 발전을 지속적으로 이어가기 위한 중요한 디딤돌입니다. 이러한 연구의 중요성을 알기에 센터에서는 국내의 교육연구기관과 적극적으로 협력하여 통합적인 관점에서 의료체계의 발전 방안을 이종욱 글로벌 의학센터는 교육과 연구를 통해 국제사회에 기여하고자 노력하고 있습니다. 개발도상국의 의료 환경에 맞는 병원 감염 관리 시스템 운영 지원과 초음파 교육으로 현지 의료진이 정확한 질병을 진단할 수 있도록 돕고 만성호흡기 질환의 예방과 지역 환경 개선을 위한 봉사도 지원합니다. 심장병 환자들이 외국 의료진에 의존하지 않고 자국에서 안심하고 치료받을 수 있도록 심장수술 교육도 시행하고 있습니다. 또한 베트남 현지에 적합한 외상치료 체계를 개발할 수 있도록 외상센터 교육 프로그램을 제공하고 비감염성 질환의 적절한 관리를 위한 1차 의료 인력도 지원하는 등 개발도상국이 자체적인 의료 역량을 높일 수 있도록 보건의료 전문 인력에 대한 교육과 지원을 아끼지 않고 있습니다. 이를 통해 의료의 손길이 필요한 곳곳에 희망을 전하며 질병 예방과 건강 증진에 대한 사회적 역할을 다하고자 합니다. 국제적 협력과 교류를 통해 지속적인 발전을 거듭하며 든든한 국제보건의료 플랫폼으로 활약하고 있는 이종욱 글로벌 의학센터. 센터가 내딛는 한 걸음 한 걸음은 의료의 힘을 더욱 굳건히 쌓아가는 묵직한 발걸음으로 그 발자취는 더 나은 세상을 향한 길잡이가 될 것입니다. 인류를 향한 사람의 기술, 이종욱 글로벌 의학센터가 함께 만들어갑니다.